going to continue with the Vimalakirti Sutra. So for our study this evening, we'll see how far we get. I keep thinking we're going to get further each time, but we're still on page 1, so we'll see if we get a little bit farther. So just to review, the Vimalakirti Sutra is one of the major Mahayana sutras. We chose it because there's a lot of subjects that are covered in the text, but they're covered in a fun way. So it's not all some of the sutras you really need to sit down and study line by line and kind of follow along necessarily. Vimalakirti offers, I think, a little bit more opportunity for conversation, and while covering some big concepts. So it's not very long, but we're going to try to do something of a modified traditional style, which is go line by line, but I'll try not to belabor any particular points because probably a new style for most people to do that. So we left off going over the line that says the total retention. So it references memory and the use of mantra and dharani for improving the memory. And one of the reasons why it was traditionally believed that the acts of actually practicing mantras, the repetitive nature, actually helped boost the memory. So of course this is a time where people didn't have laptops or tablets, or even books were scarce. If you wanted a Buddhist text, you had to copy it yourself to make a copy. So oftentimes you'd hear a teaching and you really wanted to memorize it, or memorizing was the only way to keep the teaching. So the use of mantras and dharani were part of the practice to increase the mental capacity of people. So it's still the case now, in my opinion, that mantra practice actually helps your memory. I practiced mantras in conjunction with studying all through school, and I think it helps. So if I compare before and after, so that's where we left off. So we're going to go on to point 5. Let's see, we were talking about the 7 kinds, 7 Dharma gates. So we're on the 5th. So the 5th one is eloquence. So eloquence in terms of speech and manner. So this is one thing that bodhisattvas excel at, is their eloquence. So if their primary purpose is to teach people, they should be good at teaching, good at speaking. So if they aren't, or if their language is very coarse, then it gets in the way of the actual Buddhist teaching being conveyed to people. So this is going to be one of the skills that they're very good at. So I imagine that probably like a very moving speaker, speech, someone giving a speech or a talk, or maybe even charisma like a pop star, probably you want to listen intently the entire time, like you're completely transfixed. So this is my my imagination of what the level of skill is. So it gives, of course, some examples of what that's like. So it's excelling in rhetoric. So we use rhetoric these days like in a pejorative manner, like we don't want to hear all this political rhetoric or things like that. But really it's considered to be a skill where you can expound upon a topic and go on and on for quite some time without reference to notes, or with really understanding and knowing the facts. So it makes a difference if someone's talking and they're just reading you. Have you ever been in a presentation, they're just reading you the PowerPoint slides? I can read it for myself. Tell me something else, right? So that is a huge difference in the way you engage with the audience. So these are some of the skills the Bodhisattva has. So it gives a couple examples, and I think the examples are how the Dharma is spoken is as important, if not more important, than the content. So you may only have, one sentence. I've been to talks where the entire hour and a half, 2 hour lectures on one sentence, or just the title of a text. And I come in thinking, that's all we're going to cover? Like, oh, I'll try to be, I'll try to be really, attentive. But then the speaker, the amount of information that's behind that is tremendous. Versus, someone say, okay, here's the title, and I'm going to read you verbatim, what you could read for yourself, and those kind of lectures put you to sleep. So I'm sure we've all had that experience. So it says, this type of eloquence comes with 4 skills, 4 unobstructed knowledges. And those are unobstructed knowledge concerning the meaning of the teaching. So if somebody just says, well, here's the thing, and you're like, well, what does it mean? Or, well, I don't know. Then not so good. So the Bodhisattva has unobstructed knowledge in terms of the meaning. Then unobstructed knowledge in terms of dharmas. So not only this teaching, but all teachings. So you'll often see most classical Buddhist texts make reference to literature, poetry, Confucianism, Taoism, other philosophical ideas of the time, meaning they're not limited to only one subject. So if you're lecturing on something and you can't make a comparison or an allusion to some other aspect, then it's very difficult to explain new concepts to people. So the Bodhisattva has this very broad knowledge. So if you read Kukkai's writings, which are very terse, but he makes reference to just tremendous amounts of Chinese classical history. Certain writers, they'll say, there's as much confusion as this, and they'll cite something from Chinese history that people would know. So it's the equivalent of, maybe us, talking about stories of, the founding fathers of America. We're saying, they're going to be as honest as George Washington, and to automatically, the cherry tree story or something. So there's these references that trigger some idea in your mind. But that requires a lot of additional study on their part. So the Bodhisattva said to have this level of knowledge, that they're unobstructed even in other dharmas. So it's a very broad knowledge. It's not limited. And then unobstructed in the knowledge of various languages. So this one's obvious, right? Necessary. If you're going to actually teach the Dharma, you have to speak the language of the people. I think this is probably true in terms of actual language, but also even if it's just English, you have different English for different circumstances. So the way you might talk to your, parent or grandparent is different than the way you're going to talk to your friends. It's different than the way you might talk to your supervisor. It's different than, the way you might talk to someone you've never met before. So the way you speak, the words you use, and the manner in which you deliver language is going to be different depending on the circumstance. So not only, English and French and German and Chinese and Japanese and Sanskrit, but also I think in terms of, what type of words you use and word choice. That can be very important. If your audience is fourth graders, you're going to use different language than if your audience is college students, right? And the same is true if your audience is college professors. You may use a different set of language than you might use if your audience is high school students. So you have to know your audience. So I would say that's part of what the Bodhisattva knows, which is advice you get, right? When you give your first presentation, know your audience, who you're delivering this information to. So this is something they think about. So what I think the text here is telling you is this whole section is praising the virtues of the Bodhisattva. Not the, yay, Bodhisattvas are great. But it's also teaching us what attributes do we need to develop. So if we're going to study the Dharma and then go on to teach the Dharma, what types of skills do we need to develop? How do we actually go about teaching it? So there's not a separate manual for this is how to teach the Dharma. You have to sort of figure it out. What skills does the Bodhisattva have? How do I cultivate those skills? And then, how do I do it myself? So of course it's a bit more Confucian in the education manner, meaning Confucius had a theory, it goes something along the lines of the 4 corners. So I give the student 1 corner, I expect them to, lift the other 3, or you're going to get 25%. You have to self-study 75%. So in my time in education, higher education, I've seen a change in people. When I was younger, people would study and they'd come to school the next day and say, I have questions about the lesson, and the teacher would answer those questions. Then I got older and I had, college and graduate school, you have a wider range of ages. And then I noticed younger people would just go, well, what about this? Well, what about this? And what about that? And I'd see older teachers get frustrated because they're like, well, why don't you read this in the reading? Or you were supposed to do that last night, but they just ask instead of doing their own study. And so there's, to some degree, I think today, I've noticed this with Buddhist teachers from Asia, sometimes sort of get frustrated with Western students, like, well, read first, then come ask. Get some level of understanding. So it's almost a cultural mistranslation. So by doing your self-study and then coming with a kind of a focus question, you show respect, right? Versus Americans are like, well, what's the big deal? I'm paying to be here, so answer my questions. So this is part of that language choice, right? The Bodhisattva is going to understand the differences even in the audience and the cultural connections of how we use language. So we still have problems. They don't. And then unobstructed in preaching. So if you're going to actually teach, not having any obstacles to teach. So that's going to be one of the biggest fears. How do I teach this stuff? Should I teach it? I don't know if people are ready for this teaching, right? You go through all of those ideas or concepts. So not having any obstacles to teach is going to be one of the things that the Bodhisattva excels at. So when we see that, and then we get to the point of teaching whatever we're teaching, right? Let's say we're teaching our hobby to someone, not being afraid. Just giving knowledge is very beneficial. But a lot of times people hold back because of these obstacles. They're obstructed in some manner. But in my experience, I've heard it from tradespeople. They get hired. Now there's a program. If you excel at a trade, you can get a special certificate and go to high schools and teach. And a lot of people realize they don't know how much they know, and they're able to, because they do it day in and day out, and they have a love for it, whether it be welding or pipe fitting or whatever it is. The students really feel that, that practical knowledge. So that's where teaching can be very powerful. But sometimes we're very obstructed in sharing our knowledge. So there's this suggestion that we overcome that. So that's our takeaway. So that's number 5. So 6 is mastery of the 6 perfections. So these are, what are the skills that you need as a Buddhist? How do you actually live and practice? So we probably have heard them before. I've said it before, but they bear review. So bear with me as we review them. So the 6 are the Sanskrit dana, generosity, shila, or proper conduct, ksanti, or tolerance, vidya, diligence or vigor, dhyana, concentration, sometimes meditation, and prajna, wisdom. So these 6 factors are things that we practice. They're built into the service we practice. They're built into a tremendous amount of Buddhist practice, generally. Sometimes, though, we don't notice it. So we offer flowers, and we just think, well, we make the altar pretty, or, it looks nicer. But we're actually practicing giving, right? We just practice meditation. So we're practicing dhyana, right? Concentration. So these are all things that we're practicing and we're doing, but we sometimes forget the benefit. So we'll go through some of those as we go through this. And then 7 is skillful means, upaya. So knowing how to apply your wisdom, when to apply it, and sometimes when not to. So some of the, sometimes we think of wisdom only in terms of knowledge, but this is actual practical application. When to do things, when not to do things, when to act, when not to act, when to pull back. Sometimes, I said to somebody the other day, sometimes you have to let a system break. That's the wisest thing. Then other people can see it's actually broken. Versus if you're constantly patching it, then no one realizes there's a problem, and then it creates a bigger problem. Well, sometimes you have to let things fail, and that can be very wise. But the key is when. So not when you out of ego you want to do it, like, oh, I told you. or not when like I'll show you. That's not the wise time. But you have to sometimes, knowing when to act, when not to act, very important. So it says the bodhisattvas were unfailing in their mindfulness, concentration, dharani, memorization of the Dharma, and eloquence. So we covered some of those, but sometimes the reasons why we are focused on these skills are: why should we study the Dharma? Why should we continue to study the Dharma? Isn't it something that, I learned it once and that's enough? Why should we continue to practice? Why practice once? Isn't that enough? And part of this is getting at, we have different methods. So if it says we're unfailing in their mindfulness, concentration, and dharani, their mantra practice, we have a variety of different practices for a variety of different situations. But the thing that we lose sight of with this type of knowledge versus other types of knowledge is this type of knowledge is directly applicable to our life. And a lot of other knowledges don't change as your life changes. So you learn to ride a bike. You can not ride a bike for 25 years, pull a bike out of the garage, get on it, and you can ride again. So maybe the only thing that's changed is how big you are. Maybe the bike, you go, I need a bigger bike. This was from when I was a kid. But fundamentals are still the same. The rules are still the same. But when it comes to practice of the Dharma, the road is always changing, right? Times change. As you change, then your needs change in terms of your practice and your outlook. So when people are younger, maybe they're only concerned about, where they are, what they're going to be, what kind of career should they take. Then we get later in life and we've chosen a career, and then maybe we realize, well, am I happy in this career? We reflect on things differently. And so our needs as a person changes. But also internally we're changing. So, when we're teenagers and hormones are everywhere and things are changing and parts of us are, like, wait, I'm taller, my clothes don't fit. And, so we're adjusting to ourselves, or, trying to live in this body. And then as we get older, the same thing happens again, right? We think everything's going fine, and then, I have a pain in my knee. And what does that say about me? How do I feel about that? And we have... Don't point out anyone in particular. But then we have that, maybe existential crisis, like, I can't do things the way I used to, and perhaps we've created a, idea of ourselves that now is, I'm not that person anymore because I can't do those things. So, because the Dharma is always changing, we have different methods. We have different approaches, and so that's important because unlike other types of knowledge, the change is happening everywhere, outside, inside. The method of practicing, meaning our physical body, is changing, and that doesn't seem to be the case as much. You can take your bicycle in, get an overhaul, some new tires, and oil the chain, and that old Schwinn still rides. That's not necessarily the same with us. So that causes us to have angst and emotional reactions, and so now we have to process that through our practice. So the ongoing constant learning, that's why we bother to do this as an ongoing practice, is because our life is an ongoing process. So how do we adjust, fine-tune our practice throughout life so that we're not running into a wall, literally like we would with a bicycle, right? How do we actually keep control of this thing? So the Bodhisattva is unfailing, right, in this way. So they don't stop. They see, I think, that need to continue. From their perspective, it's to continue for our benefit. But what we learn from it, our takeaway is we have to continue so that we actually know, how to stay on that bicycle. So the next line says that they were replete in charity, morality, forbearance, exertion, meditation, wisdom, and the power of skillful means. So these are the 6 paramitas that we covered. So now we're going to go into those a little bit more. So what this is telling you is the Bodhisattva hasn't rested on their laurels, right? They didn't just get to this high level of spiritual attainment and say, oh, okay, awesome. I'm nearly enlightened. This is pretty good. I'm going to find a more comfortable meditation cushion and catch up on a bunch of stuff on Netflix. It's that they're going to continue to practice. And so by virtue of their practice, they're perfecting certain skills and also exhibiting those skills. So this is the difference between maybe secular meditation practice, drug use as a way to attain certain mental states, and other paths. So if you're doing meditation and you don't have compassion as a component, then oftentimes it goes astray. And so there's a lot of very famous stories of that in Asia. There's a lot of people who've claim to practice, right, Eastern spirituality, and their behavior doesn't match their practice. So this is also a way for us to ask, are we doing these things? How do I perfect these things? How do I actually bring these things out? So the first one is dana, or generosity, and usually just translated as giving. A lot of times you go to, especially in America, you'll go to a Buddhist center and the donation box is dana. Right? And so they put like, that's your giving. That's not quite right. It's not totally wrong, but that's a very limited, very narrow interpretation. So you won't see that here. So dana, or generosity, means you're really giving of yourself. So the Buddhist teaching is clear that giving the Buddhist teaching, giving yourself your time, and then giving money or material goods, meaning especially the Buddhist time, literally the robe, cloth, or food. But that giving of material things is considered the lowest level of giving. We all need it, of course, right? So we're not going to tell our friends in Puerto Rico right now that, well, we'll just send you the teaching. Well, no, people need tarps, they need food, they need water, so we give, right? So but that's your basic necessities. But as a human being, you need more than that, right? Even if you have a pet, your pet needs more than food. You gotta rub them and groom them, and they want to like lean on you, and so there's an emotional connection. So when you give your time, even if you have to feed your dog or cat maybe less because it's near the end of the month, I have to wait till I get paid. They still want your affection, right? That's more important. So people are the same way, and the lowest level of giving is that kind of material things. Not to say that it's not important, right? People ask your help for something, you give. Your friend's moving, you help. You don't just say, well, let me offer you some wisdom. I need your help. So you give when it's appropriate. But, this idea of generosity and giving is supposed to be more expansive. So one of the other things that you'll see in Buddhist teaching in terms of giving is the giving of fearlessness. And that's practiced in a variety of ways. If you know someone who's sick, caring for them helps give fearlessness, because that's when people are fearful. Right? They're sick. They don't have anybody to care for them. Sometimes just making soup is giving fearlessness, to someone who's sick. It says there's 7 kinds of giving. Giving to visitors, travelers, the sick, their nurses, monasteries, endowments for the sustenance of monks and nuns, clothing and food according to the season. Right? So there's all types of giving. So these are the proper types of giving if we're curious, right? So the teaching actually has this. If you are going to make material offerings, what are the highest ones? So this is why, especially in Asia, you'll see Buddhist hospitals, so giving to the sick. But also, if it's just the sick, you have to give to the people who are caring for the sick, right? So it's a very expansive view. So this helps. So sometimes we want to know, how should we see a cause, and we wonder, how can we help? So if we have reference to the teaching, then I should give it this way. That's better than giving more guns to the conflict. I'll give food. That's better. So that way we're not confused, right? So what type of giving should we give? So of course, this being the Buddhist teaching, there's a tremendous amount of detail in terms of giving, but they are focused on people's true concerns, right? So if you think about, hurricane rolls through, what do you need, right? If you think about someone who's sick, what do you need? Or someone who's older and they're lonely, what does that person need? They don't need a sports car. They need your time. They need to hear from you. So those are the types of giving. So if you gravitate towards spiritual practice that pulls you away from your friends and people you care about, then I think you should question that teaching. If the teaching encourages you to call people, seek them out, spend time with them, call on them when they're sick, then I think you're following the right path, right? Those are all good things. So you can evaluate your practice based on what you're motivated or you feel compelled to do. For myself, the more I practiced, the more sappy I got. I was like, I'm tough, and these things don't bother me. And then you read a Hallmark card, and you're like, oh, this is very touching. And you're like, why do I find it touching? What happened? So you should feel more open in that way. You should feel called, right, to respond to genuine emotion. So when you see people suffering, you might literally feel it, whereas before you would just maybe say, oh yeah, that's horrible, but not be moved. So being moved, being softer is a good indication that your practice is maturing. So it was surprising for me, but it's okay. You can be sappy, it's so fun. The second one, Shila, or proper conduct, sometimes morality, is not so rigid as it sounds. So what is proper conduct? It depends. It depends on, are you practicing as a monastic? Are you, have you taken the precepts as a layperson? Which precepts are you holding? So it's going to be dependent on your level of practice. So if you're practicing as a monastic, are you holding those vows? Did you take 5 vows? Are you actually practicing abstaining from killing? Or are you saying, well, it's okay this time? So actually practicing it is important. And so this is why, as part of the service, we repeat it so we don't forget. Are we avoiding harsh speech? Are we really looking at the types of words we use, how we say things? All those things can be important. So are we avoiding lying? What forms does that go in? You're like, well, it's not that hard of a lie, it's okay. Already rationalizing it away. So all those things are helpful because maintaining proper conduct supports our meditation practice. So if we want to be successful at meditation, which is why most people are interested in Buddhism these days, right? It's more of a meditative focus than, if I go to Asia, it's more of a devotional focus. If I go to Hawaii, it's maybe somewhere in between. It's kind of interesting. Well, smack dab in the middle of the Pacific, it makes sense, right? Halfway. But that proper conduct becomes important because it supports our practice. So if we act in a way that is contrary to our practice, it's going to undermine what we're trying to do. So we sit down to meditate, all we can think about is, what we just did or hiding or, all those things. So then it becomes incredibly frustrating to do meditation. So you close your eyes and it's that one thing you don't want to think about. You're like, oh, I did do that. So the proper conduct, somebody once asked me, how come all religions want you to not have fun? So it's not that you don't have fun, it's a deeper, more real enjoyment of just the basics because you don't have all the worry. Right? Like, yeah, I robbed that bank with my friends, but what if the FBI finds me? Hopefully you didn't do that. But it could be even, little things, right? You get into more into meditation and you become more sensitive to the things you've done. And you're like, well, yeah, I swiped the stapler from that guy's desk, but he's gone, right? So you're like, So little things start to What should I do? That kind of thing. So.
Is also true in the communal sense to extend that to say that our proper conduct is one of the forms in which we give fearlessness, correct?
Absolutely, yeah. So giving a fearlessness and the manner in which you do it are important. So sometimes just showing up to a situation, gives fearlessness to somebody. Sometimes we think we need to overdo it, like a big show of force or something. Sometimes then that actually, I've seen this, right? I've seen, young women feel insecure. The boyfriend walks up and says, "Oh, is everything okay?" And now she feels secure. And then some boyfriends overreact, right? And they're like, "What are you doing talking to my girl?" And then she's like, "No, no, no." And then it's right, like the wrong thing. So we have to examine, our motivation. Is it to, beat our chest and I'm the strongest? Or is it just, by acting from the perspective of proper conduct, we can then, right, give fearlessness. We can practice giving. So many of them, depending on where you position yourself, you're actually practicing one of the others or multiple of the others. So all of those things can be very important. If you're practicing, how can you practice meditation and giving at the same time? Have you ever had somebody who's just really upset and you just listen? And you really listen? You're not like on your phone like, yeah, oh yeah, that sounds really bad. Huh? Did you say something? Right, but you really maintain eye contact and you really listen to them. And sometimes that's all they need. And instead of like 3 hours of spewing, they're 15 minutes, you're like, oh, I feel so much better now, you really listened. But that requires attentiveness. It requires that you stay engaged. That is deepened through meditation practice. So all of these, I think, interconnect, and the quality of your relationships are better. The quality of your life is better. You might have a tremendous amount to do in a day, but if you do it with meditative focus, if you do it where you're giving and you see that reaction in people, it gives you energy, right? So there's a payback, right? It's like the recycling symbol. It kind of goes back to each one. So you're getting, it's fuel that supports you and you get fuel back. So. The third one is Kshanti, tolerance. Maybe forbearance is better. We use tolerance like you see something heinous and horrible and we'll just let it happen. So we don't mean it necessarily in this way. It's a wiser view. So you look at a situation and you analyze. It requires that you apply some wisdom and say, is it helpful for me to get involved? Or should I just stay here? Someone starts yelling and screaming at you. Is it helpful if I scream back? Or should I just, okay, that's how you feel, and just keep walking? So it's not that you just take because of some overarching, religious value that, I have to remain aloof. It's really an analysis of, does engaging with the situation help? So that does take some time to figure out. And sometimes it's the opposite, right? Sometimes you have to say something, and that actually helps. But when? When do you act? When do you not act? That takes the development of wisdom. But forbearance generally, I would say generally, in the face of temptation, trigger, provocation, challenges, if we take a little bit more time to analyze, usually we'll figure out a better way to respond. So, it reminds me, there was a Kkk protest in Ohio a couple years back. And they wanted to march through the predominantly black neighborhood of the city. And the police were like, oh, it's getting bad. But they got the permit and they marched, and everybody in the community came out and lined the street and just stared at them, pretty much in silence. And they were really scared because they're like, what is going to happen? And nothing happened, but they didn't ask for that permit again. So in fact, it was a really intelligent way to counter-protest. Rather than scream and yell back, people showed up in force, quietly. and it was very imposing, but that was it. So the community leaders decided this is what we want to do. We don't want to all just stay in our house and let them march, but we're going to show up. But we're not going to give them what they want, because a lot of times those rallies, right? They want, because they're the ones with the police guard, right? They want you to throw rocks and stuff, so the police react. So this was their response. It's very interesting. So this is where we have to look, right? What kind of response? What's helpful? So the fourth one is vidya. So this is the root word for vigor. So diligence, energy. And this is a really important one because this is what we probably need the most, right? We need stick-to-itiveness, right? We have to keep going. We have to put energy into our practice. Anything that we want to see a result requires our investment, time or energy. If you have a garden, you've got to spend some time in that garden to get fruit. Everybody doing harvest right now, it's been work little by little. You weed it, water it, watch it, keep the deer away, depending on what you're growing. So it requires work. So there, any sort of payout, that's the requirement. Sometimes we lose sight of that, I think, today, because media doesn't show you successful people the training period. They just show the successful person. They don't show necessarily all the hard work that goes in. Or even if they do, it's like a 30-second montage. And so we don't realize that a lot of times it's a tremendous amount of work. Even people who are talented naturally in some area put in a tremendous amount of work. They don't just wake up and sing a huge concert or something. There's a lot of practice. So the same is true with spiritual practice. When we see an example of good practice, it's there's a background, there's a story to that. There's been work put in that's invested. And so we have to invest some time. So when it comes to spiritual practice, meditation, even 5 minutes, right? I mean that honestly. Even 5 minutes a day will pay off tremendously. If you have time and you can put in more time, great. Even 15 minutes. People say they don't have time. I say, okay, what TV shows do you watch? Sacrifice 1 half-hour sitcom. That's it. Or, even better, sacrifice just the commercial breaks of that sitcom. 10 minutes. The show's really only 21 minutes. The rest is commercials. Or, wake up just a tiny bit earlier. So then we create space. And then the benefit that we feel, the payout is tremendous. So it's worth it. But part of it's just getting started. And once we get started, then how do we maintain the motivation? Part of that's why we have group practice. It's hard to do solo. It really is, especially in the beginning. I meditated for years, just high school student in my bedroom, and then I'd stop and then begin. So it really, I think, took hold when I had group practice, because I wanted to bring a better practice to the group practice the next week, and then it continued. Or I'd see other people, and I'm like, oh wow, because I was doing this. Oh man, they haven't moved at all. They're totally still the whole time. I'm thinking other people are sleeping and what? Oh, okay. So it was inspiring. It was inspiring to see, people who could be that still. So, okay, all right, that's a good model. So that created energy for me. So that was helpful. But I really did do. I was in college. I wanted to be like a feather. Are they still here? Floating up there? I don't know. So that kind of diligence is important. So diligence, vigor, vidya is connected with part of the Eightfold Path, right effort. What kind of effort do you put in? What type of effort are not good? So this is why we have proper focus as a meditation, and other things that may not be a proper focus of meditation. So this is where, mindfulness alone is not enough. You can be mindful of things that are not helpful to you. You can take as an object of your meditation something that will totally undermine your life. So let's say, let's say you're mindful of, well, I'll use an example of my neighborhood growing up. You're mindful of criminals and their activities. And so you make a study of how do they engage in their criminal activity, and then you start, oh, maybe I can engage in criminal activity. That's not helpful, right? Assassins can be mindful. So this is not what we're practicing. This is the difference. So adding these attributes change from generalized meditation, mindfulness practice to Buddhist practice. So this is the difference. Okay. Number 5, dhyana, concentration. So dhyana, this is a deeper state of concentration. The difference between mindfulness and where mindfulness leads. So mindfulness would lead you to a deeper state of concentration that we would term dhyana. And of course, being Buddhism, they delineate all the different levels and their factors and attainments. But mindfulness itself is one of our base gateway entry practices to the development of dhyana. So this is where we're going, this type of concentration. It's a very deep state of meditative absorption, right? Where we are beginning to still the thoughts, or we have a single point of focus. And that takes time. It takes a lot of time. When you have that first experience, you're like, oh, that was how long? Oh, you've completely been focused. And it may not seem like that long to begin with, but then you'll start to notice that it bleeds over into other things you do. You may be more aware while you're driving. Again, you're more aware of everything. Your concentration on any task becomes better. And again, this is the difference between actual meditation practice and drug use. Right? So once you stop using the drug, the effect goes away. Once you stop meditating, meditation's effects continue with you. So it completely changes the person. And it's free, which is good. And it doesn't wear off, right? So as we practice it and investigate, it just deepens. So this is the benefit. And you may not notice immediately. If you journal, say my meditation was this and that, and then you look back 3 months and you'll be like, well, that's a totally different person. That person's meditation is not my meditation today. But sometimes we lose sight because it's incremental. It's very slow. So these are the benefits. And then 6, prajna, wisdom. So wisdom is beyond knowledge. So this isn't just, I know a lot of people are very intelligent, very well educated, and not wise at all. And I know some people who are not educated, don't have advanced degrees, and they're very wise. So wisdom is really understanding situations, being able to apply knowledge in the appropriate way at the appropriate time. And as some of my old relatives would say, common sense is not common. And I think that was a really wise statement, because they had a certain, probably from just life experience, a certain type of wisdom that they developed. But in Buddhism, we're looking at the actual nature of existence and asking, how do things really work? What misconceptions do we have about the nature of existence? And then how do those misconceptions actually lead us to make the wrong decisions? And this is why we meditate, so we have that perspective. We can develop that awareness. And then we start to see it day to day. You go to the store, you're going to buy the same thing, and you're like, why do I buy this? It's not really helping me, or it's not good, or I already have it, or do I really need it? And then you're like, and over time, you just don't gravitate to those same things anymore. So it starts to slowly change a lot of your behavior. So a lot of things that, I had a lot of hobbies when I was, between 16 and 19. and I started noticing I had less and less hobbies, and I started focusing on things that were more important, because I was just like, I'll do this, I'll do this, and then nothing ever got done. But I had all these interests, right? Then later I noticed, well, okay, now I can read about them or engage with them and enjoy it. I can enjoy somebody else's enjoyment of it. I don't have to do everything necessarily. So it's different. Or you find, it's not that I actually was interested in all those things. You just were scattered. So development of wisdom is something that comes with practice. It comes with study. And I think, in my experience, we study a little bit, we practice, we see the application of what we've studied, it deepens our wisdom. And so little by little it grows. So this is the key compassion and wisdom necessary within Buddhist practice. So you can have a lot of compassion, but you have to have wisdom to know how do you actually help people, how do you actually help the situation. Sometimes our attempt to help creates more problems. A good example, I was at our temple in Seattle, and one of the members there is on the mayor's team for their homeless task force. And he was talking about the problem of homelessness in Seattle, and he said, whatever you do not give them food. What? Why not? He goes, everybody thinks they're helping by giving them food. He goes, but they get so much they can't eat it all, and it's caused a huge rat problem in the city. So now we have an extra problem. We have so many rats, and now it's causing the spread of disease. And I'm like, oh, right. So you have compassion, you want to help, but you're not helping the right way. And he says, yeah, everybody wants to help. So they see people and they bring in food, they give them these food baskets, but they can't, it rots, it just gets left, and now there's this massive rat problem. So now he goes, we have extra problems that the city never had before. So knowing how to help, how and where to deliver services, they've had to learn how best to help people, and they had to retool by asking, where do you want the services? Some people have even lost sight of how to live in our society. They have their own society, and so they don't want to be in a shelter. They want to be where they are, so you have to go to them and provide the services. So listening to the person, I was like, oh, there's a lot of compassion, but there's also a tremendous amount of wisdom that comes from engaging with the people they're trying to help. So that's where we need to think about the same way. Sometimes we do things for ourselves that we think are helpful and they're not. We say, oh, I can't wait this weekend, I'm going to Netflix binge. And then sometimes you just feel more exhausted afterwards. So you think it's relaxing and it's not relaxing. Or you're going to go, I'll do retail therapy, I'll buy some things, I'll make myself feel better. And then you realize, well, now I'm stressed because I can't pay this bill. Right? So sometimes we do things that aren't actually good for us, but we've been conditioned to think they are. So developing wisdom, actually, a lot of times it naturally starts to change our own behavior and outlook. But it happens in a natural way, because you don't want someone saying, well, that's not good for you. I'll show you, I'm going to go do it. So that's our natural reaction. So this style, I think, helps us see it for ourselves, and that's more beneficial. Okay. So that was 15 minutes on one paragraph, one sentence. So we'll go to the next sentence. So it says, had attained the forbearance of the non-arising of dharmas and the non-attainment of all things. So this is continuing the praise of the bodhisattvas. So here is, had attained forbearance of the non-arising of dharmas and non-attainment of all things. This is patience based on the realization of the non-arising phenomena. So really having that insight of nothing is really created, all things are in a state of flux. And when you see that, you develop a certain wisdom, and it brings a certain patience. And it's praising certain elements of the bodhisattva. So this is actually kind of coded language for a certain rank of bodhisattva. And this is important for the overarching arc of the text itself. Like who is speaking, who are the actors in the play, so to speak. Like who, as we get further into the text, are the main personalities, and why Manjushri is the primary speaker. So this is saying that we're talking about bodhisattvas of the 8th rank, and that rank, or bodhisattvas who have obtained the 8th bhumi or stage, the 8th stage of a bodhisattva. Knowing what that stage of a bodhisattva is helps us understand part of the conversation that goes on through the text. So this is what the sentence is, sort of an allusion, a literary allusion to things to come. So what do you mean by rank? So this is, at the 8th stage and higher, is a stage known as immovable, meaning there's no backsliding. So the bodhisattvas have achieved this rank, and they're not going to regress. So once you get to that rank, there's no going back. So your attainment maybe is sort of cemented in, it's assured. And for ourselves, though, the entire beginning of the text is praising the attributes of the bodhisattva. So we're like, okay, great, good for them. Why? But it's also teaching us something, right? This is something that we don't have, but we crave. We learn something and we forget. We practice something and we don't maintain the same level of skill. And the text is telling us that at the same time that it's possible to have that attainment. That's something we should strive for. Here's an example of that, but it's also a reminder that we have to work for it. So there are a lot of skills that I have had and could do better at other times in life than I can do now. And generally the fact that I haven't practiced every day, then your skills get rusty. So the bodhisattva at this stage doesn't get rusty anymore, right? So there's no backsliding. So I think here is a good example. And so where do they excel at not backsliding? At the 6 paramitas especially. They're constantly practicing these. And because they're constantly practicing, it supports their meditation. They continue to excel and they don't backslide. So we don't, right? We don't practice generosity every day. Some days we're like, I'm going to be selfish. And then we're like, yeah. And we pride ourselves on that. That's okay. But we should try to practice a little bit more. So this type of forbearance, maybe a better way to say it is serene acceptance. Meaning a lot of things we can't change, can't address right now, but we don't grit our teeth and bear it. It's not that kind of forbearance. We accept it serenely because we have a deeper understanding or insight into it. So that insight is helpful for the whole concept of forbearance. Forbearance is one that I think people sometimes struggle with because they want to fix everything. Men want to fix everything. Sometimes women say, just listen, don't try to fix it. And I go, what? Why are you telling me that? So there's a more wisdom that needs to be developed. So the next line, we're able to accord with the truth in turning the irreversible wheel of the Dharma. So turning the wheel of the Dharma is an illusion for teaching. So when the Buddha sets in motion the wheel, it means they're teaching something. But here it says irreversible wheel, or from the Chinese, maybe literal translation, never turning back wheel. So it's always going forward, never going back. So this is again an allusion to the 8th level of the stages of the Bodhisattva, not backsliding. So it goes in depth, of course. What kinds of things do you not backslide from? Right? What types of things are there's no regression? So you're not regressing from the literal position you've attained. You're not regressing from the practice you've pursued. So if you're pursuing a particular type of meditation practice, you don't stop doing that and do something else, which is very helpful because a lot of times as spiritual practitioners, we do this and then we do this and we do this, but I want to learn this and this and this. We're able to maintain one practice really well. So if I look at a lot of practitioners who are older, And even in Shingon, we have the great fortune to have a lot of practitioners in their late 80s, early 90s. I find that they do the same practice now all the time. They're not jumping around doing a lot of different practices. So this is something we learn directly from the sutra, from the Bodhisattva, that oftentimes engaging deeply with one practice is better than jumping around to a bunch of different practices. And the third is there's no backsliding from staying in dhyana, so they're able to stay in the meditative state for, if not all the time, much longer than we do. So if you're a Buddha, you're probably always in meditation. If you're a Bodhisattva, you're probably always acting from the state of meditation, but you're able to stay in that state. Right? That's easier. Of course, if you don't have a body, it's probably a lot easier. I don't need to do laundry because I don't wear clothing. But you're able to stay in that state much longer, and that does come from practice. So why do I say start with 5 minutes? You don't want to associate frustration with your meditation. So you start with 5 minutes. You're like, oh, okay, that was good. Maybe next time I'll do 7 minutes. But if someone says you've got to sit there for 3 hours, you'll just be like, oh, I hate this, and you'll never meditate again. So from the Bodhisattva's perspective, though, they can stay. Right? They don't have regression from these. Why is all these important? Why are we praising the virtues of the Bodhisattva at the beginning of this text? Because it tells us what great teachers they are, right? This is like reading their curriculum vitae, or you go into a class and you're like, oh, I want to take this class. It's from a famous professor. He wrote this book. I read the book. It's very interesting. And then you're excited. So this is getting you excited about your teachers. So the whole, beginning of the sutra, first, we're still on page 1, but the first page of the text is praising the teachers that you're about to get the teaching from. So, but also encouraging you to learn what their skills are, what they've developed, so we can develop the same. So it's very helpful. So, should we do one more? We'll do one more, okay. So the next sentence is, they understood well the characteristics of the Dharma and understood the capacity of sentient beings. So when it says capacity here, it means literally the roots of the sentient beings. So the Bodhisattva has the skill or ability to, they know the teaching and they know the student. They know the student so well, they know your karmic roots, they know where you're coming from, literally. Not just what class did you have last, like coming from, but they know when you're asking a question, they can see more deeply into the nature of the question. And when you have that kind of a teacher, they are able to address things that maybe you're not aware of. So their answer is answering something much deeper. So is the answer A or B? A. Well, that's one answer. Or the reason you're asking that is because you're under the misconception of this, which stems from that, and could be fixed by doing this practice. And you're like, oh, okay, all right. So these are the kind of answers you see in the sutras, though, right? The student asks a question, and the Buddha says, well, that triggers a whole discourse. It's not, it's not that kind of answer. So this is the kind of skill the Bodhisattva has. So if we're celebrating the virtues to begin with, then we get more into their actual teaching skill. So this becomes helpful. And it also helps us distinguish if we're looking for a teacher, if we're looking at what's the difference between, my 6th grade teacher and, the Bodhisattva. What's the difference between this teaching and another teaching? This is the difference. This is how we are able to generate our own wisdom. So one of the skills you develop as a meditator is properly discerning the Dharma, right? You're able to look more deeply into the teaching on your own. So in the beginning, you read the sutra, same way I did. I'm very confused. What is this about? And then later you read it and you're like, oh, the wisdom's coming off the page more. So this can be very helpful. So how you understand the teaching, understanding the breadth and depth of the teaching, understanding the needs of the listener and the audience, those things are critical. Otherwise, the same teaching is not going to be the right way for everybody. if you remember back to learning long division or something like that at school, probably at some point the teacher came, sat next to you, and helped you, and you're like, oh, now I see, now I get it. So that kind of breakthrough is necessary even in spiritual practice. So it's very important. Okay, so we'll stop there. Otherwise, we'll go forever and you'll never go home. So, are there any questions on any of those portions? So we're still on page 1. I have a link to the actual PDF of the text on the website. So you can purchase the actual book. Yeah, I just have the PDF right now. Or you can make reference to the PDF. The translation, there are several translations of the Vimalakirti Sutra. If you want to read other translations, that's completely fine. So everybody chooses slightly different words for the Chinese, but it's helpful sometimes to compare, get a different sense for it. But the reason we're using this text again is it's readily available. It's easy to get right now. It's not out of print. It's a one of the newer translations. So there's been some updating to language. Professor Thurman's translation is very good. There are some places in it, I think, probably definitely announced this was translated in the 70s. And so it is possible, I think, that maybe modern readers read it and have a different idea than the way we might choose words now. Just 30, 40 years difference makes a difference in how we use English. But I think if, in my opinion, if you read this one and go back to his, you'll gain a lot from his that, just translation difference, word choice. So. Okay. So if you look at the form, we'll do the dedication of merit. It's the last sentence. So if you have some issue, person in mind, somebody who needs a little extra energy, we'll keep them in mind as we recite this and dedicate our practice to others. Not everybody can be with us this evening, but we want to have them benefit from our practice and our study. So. May these merits be shared by all beings everywhere, so that all of us together may attain supreme awakening. So thank you all for joining tonight. And as always, if you have a question you'd rather ask offline, then that's fine. So if you want to stay for some more tea, you can do that too.